Hello, and welcome to Enlightened Empaths, your community for the spiritually awakened, where we discuss, explore, and connect with fellow empaths, healers, intuitives, and seekers. Hello, empaths. We hope your week is off to a great start. Today, we're going to talk about coincidences and what they mean. You know, Denise, I'm fascinated by the idea of coincidences and synchronicity because I think it's one of the ways that the universe speaks to us. Do you agree with that?
I do agree. And I think for many of us that are intuitives or empaths or sensitives, sometimes we might fall into that trap of believing, well, there's never a coincidence and it's always a sign, or it's just a coincidence. So I think that this will be a fun show to kind of look at the difference between the two.
Yeah, I agree. And I think when we shrug it off like that, oh, it's just a coincidence, we miss an opportunity to try to discover what is being shown to me right now.
Right.
What is the universe trying to tell me? Can a coincidence be attributed to quantum physics? Maybe it's just pure magic, or could it be a sign from the universe? Well, in 2015, a study was published in New Ideas in Psychology, and they said that coincidences are an inevitable consequence of the mind searching for causal structure in reality. That sounds really boring and unmagical. So after listening to today's show, you might start to believe that there's a lot more to coincidence than just our brain looking for recognizable patterns. Scientists have been studying coincidences since the beginning of the 20th century when Australian biologist Paul Kammerer wrote a book about meaningful coincidences in 1919. And he said that coincidences arise out of unknown forces or waves that he called seriality, which he defined as a lawful recurrence of the same or similar things or events in time and space. And then, of course, 25 years later, Carl Jung coined the term synchronicity after he experienced his own strange coincidence. He was listening to a patient describe a dream she had had about a scarab beetle when at that exact moment, a scarab beetle landed on the window outside his desk, which is really a really interesting coincidence because those types of beetles aren't even in the area where he was living at the time. So Jung believed meaningful coincidences were produced by the force of synchronicity and could be considered glimpses into what he called the unus mundus, or one world, which is the theory that there is an underlying order and structure to reality, a network that connects everything and everyone. And I think if I really had to drill down to the heart of what fascinates me about coincidence is exactly that line, the one world. I really do believe that we live in this one connected world. You know, have you ever seen, what is that movie with Dustin Hoffman, the Searching for Huckabees, and he holds up a blanket and he's trying to tell the other character, like, this is what the world is. Like, you might be on this corner of the blanket and I might be over here, but we're all the same blanket. It was such a simple metaphor for how we're all one. And yet, you know, we might only be aware of one corner of the blanket, but we're all in this together.
Right. And it's aligns with, we've gone on this a lot about the collective consciousness, how we can all tap into that. We can find these resources and the interdependence of all the different species. And I think that what you're talking about is a correlation of both of those.
Yeah, I do too. Now, there's a doctor who wrote a book about coincidences more recently than 1919. His name is Dr. Bernard Beitman, and he had his own fascinating experience back in the 70s. He says that one afternoon in February of 1973, he was just in his kitchen, suddenly had to rush to the sink because he started choking uncontrollably. And he was really confused because he wasn't eating or drinking. There was nothing to cough up. And yet for several minutes, he couldn't catch his breath or swallow. And then the next day, his brother called to tell him that 3,000 miles away, their father had died from choking at the same time as Dr. Beitman's mysterious episode. So he's a professor of psychiatry, and this thing happens, and now he's fascinated by coincidence, and so he started studying what are these coincidences? What could it mean? He even began something called the Coincidence Project, where he encouraged people to share their own stories. He defines a coincidence as two events coming together with apparently no causal explanation. The most commonly reported coincidences are associated with mass media. So think about a person, for example, thinks of an idea and then hears or sees it on TV, the radio, or the internet. I'm sure you guys have heard those stories of how, like, 5 people will apply for a patent on the same day. Like, remember when Alexander Graham Bell applied for a patent? He beat like 2 other people, including a woman, I'd like to add, who was also trying to apply for a patent that same day for the telephone.
Right.
Or maybe you're thinking of someone and then that person calls unexpectedly. That happens to me all the time. All the time. I mean, just the other day, I called my friend and I punch in the little number and there's no ringing or dial tone. And I hear her going, hello? And she was like, I was just calling you. Does that ever happen to you?
Oh, yeah, especially with people that I'm close to.
Yes.
That, yeah, very, very much so. And as you were speaking of this, I was thinking about the the when we have a chord with someone, when we're able to read their energy, when we're able to feel that. So is that also part of this coincidence or probable synchronicity?
I think so. I mean, that's why I wanted to do this show, because I think people who are empathic and connected to their intuition have more coincidences, and that's been proven.
Right. I'll always say I don't believe in coincidences because I agree with Jung and this other person, that this Dr. Beitman, that it is a causal impact, that there is a connection between it all.
Yeah, I do too. I do too. Another common coincidence people experience is being in the right place at the right time to advance like your work or career or education, which reminds me of my favorite scene from that lovely documentary about Gene Wilder that came out last year. And he was like, kept getting rejected and he was in New York for some auditions and kept getting rejected. And he walks out of the hotel just to kind of go for a walk and really think, should I just give this all up and go home? And he takes a right out of the hotel and he bumps into Mel Brooks. And the rest is history, because they had the most amazing work partnership and he got a fantastic role because of just taking a right outside of his hotel. And he says for the rest of his life, he wondered, what would have happened to me if I walked out of that hotel and took a left? Now, people who believe in the paranormal or who describe themselves as spiritual or religious have more meaningful coincidences than those who do not. So that always makes me wonder, do woo-woo people like us have more coincidences because we believe in them, because we recognize them rather than shrug them off when they occur? Or is our receptivity inviting more of these meaningful coincidences?
Well, I was thinking about this the other day, about being intuitive, and someone had written something that said because of the trauma in their childhood, that they were conditioned to become intuitive. And we've talked about that in different episodes, and we've talked about it in conversation. So I was thinking about it, is that is that part of the plan that we come in with? Is I think it's an awareness is what I'm getting to. I think that heightened awareness does make us more receptive and conscious. We read the room. We're going to see the nuances of a potential coincidence or synchronicity in a way that someone else might just brush it off and not notice it.
I think it's both. I really do. I think
Yep.
that it proves that we all have latent intuition. We all have this natural sixth sense, and it comes out when we really, really need it. So for those of us who were raised in a very interesting childhood and had to be finely tuned to the ever-changing emotions of one or both of our parents, we needed that sixth sense. So we cultivated it. But I don't think it means that we came into the world with more intuition than the average person. Do you know what I mean? I think it shows that we all have that ability. It's just some of us had to cultivate it earlier than others.
I agree with you 100% that there's a duality to this, and that I do think we all come that way. I think that there is little people, little children, small children. And I spoke with someone recently And she said that her nephew, highly, highly connected, dreams, sees spirit, all of the things that little tiny people can do, and is just now starting school, and said to his mom, said to her, this woman's sister, I don't see them the way I used to. They're not coming around as much. So is it an age related? Because when you get into, 7 years old, your abstract thinking starts to kick in, the influence of being in a socialized school setting. I mean, there's all those different variables. But I think that many of us, that's when we start becoming more aware of the coincidences in our lives. We're retapping into that font of knowledge and experience that we've already had.
Yeah. I think little children lose their connection to intuition around that age for all the reasons you just said. But also, I really believe it's because when they come here to Earth, they have to acclimate to being in this dimension and this solid third dimension and the earthly stuff. But they're more used to heaven. And so they have more of a connection to the other side. And as they, year after year after year, they identify home more with Earth rather than the other side. Do you know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
Now, studies also show that people are more likely to experience coincidences when they're in a heightened emotional state like stress or grieving, which I think also gives some credence to what I was saying about how our sixth sense is part of our survival mechanism, that it kicks in when we need it.
Mm-hmm.
Some research suggests that people who have more meaningful coincidences might also have higher life satisfaction and more creativity. Well, I think that's true because I think if you're naturally intuitive and spiritual and connected to the deeper meaning of life, and you're focused on really seeing the interconnectedness that weaves us all together, I think you are going to have a higher life satisfaction overall and be more engaged with your creativity.
Oh, and it's a hell of a lot more entertaining.
I agree. Now, the most popular explanation among survey respondents that he discovered in his coincidence project for mysterious coincidences are God or fate. And then the second explanation is randomness. Those boring scientists again. The third is that our minds are connected to one another or to the universe as a whole. Dr. Beitman, he's been researching a term that he created called simulpathity. I have no idea if I'm saying that right. It's feeling a loved one's pain at a distance, as he believes he did with his father. And he believes that this can be attributed to the existence of the psychosphere, a kind of mental atmosphere through which information and energy can travel between two people who are emotionally close, though physically distant. He suspects that humans transmit some unobserved energetic information, which other people then process or organize into emotion and behavior. He says just as sharks have ampullae in their skin that detect small electromagnetic changes to help them locate their prey, it's plausible, maybe even probable, that humans have similar mechanisms that detect coincidences. So that's interesting, isn't it, to think about a psychosphere?
I think we do it all the time.
I do too.
And when you think about intuitives, or I'm going to use the example of a medical intuitive that can physically feel what's happening in someone else's body, there's no real logical reason for that except the transference of energy.
Exactly. Yeah. Years ago, maybe 4 years ago, I did a really, really deep dive into all the undisclosed documents from the CIA's remote viewing projects.
Right.
And they were able to very, very scientifically show that we are all interconnected and that all known data is out there. And I found most of those documents on a website called theblackvault.org. And Denise, I tried to go back in there and find that there's this one document that I really, really enjoyed about how they were able to show through these very, very talented remote viewers that we are all connected. I can't find that website. I don't know if he shut it down or what. But it was started by this kid who's like, in his 50s now, but he started it in high school where he just started filing FOIA requests, Freedom of Information request. And when he would get these documents, he would publish them on the blackvault.org. And he had his own podcast. I don't know what happened to the website. So if anyone knows, shoot me an email, because that was a great resource for stuff like that. But I digress.
But on a smaller version of that, I worked with a group of people doing a group meditation last fall. And we went in with an intention. Everyone went in. There was no script of this is exactly what's going to happen. But I would say about a third of the people had the same exact experience with what they perceived, what they sensed, what they saw. So that's another example of how interconnected our energies can be, because these were people on a Zoom meeting that were from all over North America.
Fascinating. Time and distance do not separate us.
No, they really don't.
So in his book, Meaningful Coincidences, he shares this really fascinating story of a young man who intended to end his life by the shore of an isolated lake. So while he sat crying in his car, another car pulls up and his brother gets out. When he asked his brother for an explanation, how did you know I was here? What are you doing here? The brother said he didn't know why he got in the car, where he was going, or what he would do when he got there. He just knew he needed to get in that car and drive. And he saved his brother's life.
So I'm sure there are a lot of people listening that would say that was divine intervention, that guides and angels stepped in, that they had a soul contract. I mean, we've gone at this from so many different ways. And for many people, though, that might not be as avid a listener to the things we talk about, it would just be, well, that was just luck, or what a coincidence that happened. There's too much to just say it was a random.
Yeah, I agree. Way too much. Okay, so we collected some famous coincidences that have occurred in history. Do you want to share those now?
Yeah, I think that's a good plan. Just because this is not new. This isn't anything that all of a sudden, because more people are conscious of the interconnectedness or their own awareness or their own ability to be intuitive. This has been going on a long time.
A long time, yeah. And some of these you guys might know, but some of them might be new to you. Thomas Jefferson and John Adams died hours apart on the same day. What was that day? July 4th, 1826, the 50th anniversary of our independence. 5 years later, President James Madison also died on July 4th, which means that 3 of our first 5 presidents died on Independence Day.
That's pretty crazy when you think about it.
It really is. It really is. Plus, Thomas Jefferson and John Adams were best friends. And then, they ran against each other for president. John Adams won. They said some not so nice things about each other on the campaign. So they never spoke again until the end of their lives. And they made up, and they were both, letters survived. They were both so happy that their friendship mended. And I think it was John Adams. His last words were, "He still lives," meaning Thomas Jefferson. But actually, no, they had died on the same day. So I think, yes, it's an interesting coincidence that the 2 men who fought so hard for our independence would die on Independence Day. But I think it also gives some credence to what we were saying about the emotional, energetic connection between 2 people.
Well, and between family units. How many people do you know of that their grandmother has the same birthday as the granddaughter, or the people, oh, my child was born on my first wedding? There's specific dates in families that seem very interconnected.
Yes, I find that really interesting too.
So another one is, less than a year before John Wilkes Booth killed Abraham Lincoln, Booth's brother Edwin saved the life of Lincoln's eldest son, Robert. So, Edwin was a devoted supporter of the Union during the Civil War, but he also had a more personal connection to the martyr President Abraham Lincoln. So in late 1864, Lincoln's son, Robert Todd, was traveling via train from New York to Washington, and during a stop in Jersey City, New Jersey, he stepped back on the crowded platform to let some other people go by, pressing his back against a stopped train. And then the train started to move. Lincoln fell on the tracks and would have been gravely injured, or worse, if a stranger hadn't caught him by the collar and hauled him back up onto the platform. And as he later wrote, Lincoln recognized him, that it was the famous stage actor Edwin Booth, and thanked him. So, I mean, that,
Isn't that
okay.
crazy?
Well, it's in that category of you can't make that shit up.
I know. And I've read a lot about this. Edwin Booth was considered the Brad Pitt of his day.
Oh.
He was incredibly good looking, incredibly famous, and his wonky, awful brother, John Wilkes Booth, just never could achieve the same fame or accolades as his brother or their father, who was also pretty famous. And they think that's one of the reasons that he fell into this, this gang of misfits who decided to take down the president. But it's like having Brad Pitt save your life, and then years later, his little brother kills your dad. Like, that's just wild.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Robert Lincoln was on the scene for not one, not two, but three presidential assassinations. So think about all these weird coincidences he was at the heart of. Less than a month after sitting at his father's deathbed in April 1865, Robert Todd Lincoln resigned his U.S. Army commission and moved to Chicago to be with his distraught mother. He later married, had children, and established a successful law practice. He also remained active in politics, accepting the post of Secretary of War for President Garfield in 1881. That July, Lincoln was at the railroad station. Here he goes again with these railroad stations in Washington, ready to travel with Garfield. Before their train left the station, a deranged, disgruntled office seeker shot Garfield in the back. The president died of complications from the wound 2 months later. And then in 1901, President William McKinley invited Lincoln to Buffalo to attend the Pan American Exposition. Lincoln was heading to meet the president when an anarchist fatally shot McKinley in the chest and abdomen in front of a crowd of well-wishers. Lincoln, who was in the latter part of his career, served as president of the Pullman Company, was said to have wryly remarked that there was a certain fatality about the presidential function when I am present.
I wouldn't want to invite him to the dinner.
I know. Scratch him off the guest list. Sorry, Robert.
And of course there would be people that would look at that, well, he's politically involved, he was, close to all, but he wasn't. I mean, he was on the fringe of it, I guess, and how different the times were. So I think another part of this that we're looking at is people will try to force it just into being, there not being a pattern to it, or there not being anything more than just stuff happens.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's definitely some type of connection there. So we also collected just some stories from average, ordinary people like you and me who experienced some amazing coincidences, and we wanted to share some of those with you guys. Do you want to start us off?
Sure. This was on the BBC. It was posted on the BBC from a viewer named Fergus Smith, who said he was sitting on the balcony of a hotel in San Jose, Costa Rica, writing a postcard to a friend back in Scotland. A couple at the next table were speaking Slovene.
I don't know. Slovene?
Slovene. So I got talking to them in Slovene. They asked where I was from. I said Scotland and added, I bet I'm the first Scot you ever met who speaks Slovene. No, we had a teacher at uni from Scotland. He spoke Slovene. I said, really? Was his name Paul by any chance? They said, yes. He said, why do you ask? And I said, do you want to sign a postcard to him? So, I mean, small world stuff. And I think all of us have had that happen, where we'll meet someone in a different part of the country or different part of the world or in a situation where there should be no connection. I love that stuff.
I do too. This next one comes from Marilyn McCune, who says, I am a Canadian adoptee. I met my husband in Prague. His family lives in Seattle, so I go to meet his mother. Then my adoption search turns up the name of my birth father in rural Canada. I tell the details to my mother-in-law. She tells her close friend the paternal family name. Turns out my mother-in-law's close friend has been vacationing with my biological father's family for decades. 3 countries, millions of people, and the man I married connected me by 3 degrees to my birth father. Wow. That reminds me, have you ever seen those? They come up a lot on social media from time to time. you'll see a picture of two, like a family at Disney World, and there'll be like a 9-year-old girl, and in the background there'll be like a little 9-year-old boy with his family, and 20 years later they end up meeting and getting married.
Mm-hmm.
I think those are so romantic and talk about fate and destiny in beautiful ways.
Well, and is it we've oh my goodness, coincidence or predestined? Is it contracted? Is it already we're just showing up and playing our role in it all?
Yeah,
But I
I
think the
think
coincidences that or lack thereof or whatever we want to call them are little benchmarks. You're in the right place. You are on the right track. We're going to let you know. Have you heard that about deja vu? The
yes.
deja vu are a reminder that you're on the right place in your life path.
I and things like this make me believe that. I really do believe that when we're creating our soul plan with our team of guides and angels, I think we put these little mysterious markers in there that include synchronicity, coincidence, deja vu, right place, right time, just so we can remind our soul, you got this. You're on the right path.
Yes, yes. So, and again, the reminder that we're not doing this alone.
Yeah.
Another one was a strange coincidence that happened with Anthony Hopkins, the well known actor. And he first heard he'd been cast in a part for the film The Girl from Petrovka. Hopkins tried to find a copy of the book on which it was based, a novel by George Pfeiffer. He combed the bookstores of London, couldn't find one. Then, to his shock and delight, he spotted a copy lying on a bench at Leicester Square Station. He recounted the story to Pfeiffer when they met on location, when the two discovered that the book Hopkins had stumbled upon was the very one that the author had mislaid in another part of London, an advance copy full of full red ink amendments and marginal notes he'd made in preparation for U.S. edition. So, I mean, come on, people.
I know. I
Uh,
know.
but when it happens to you, when it is so clear, it's fun. It's stepping through the looking glass. It's being in the vortex. It's realizing there's so much more.
I know. It's so cool. This one from Kathy Cape was submitted on Facebook and will make you pause. She says, we had to move from our lovely old farmhouse in Suffolk due to work. One evening in our new home in London, we got back after an evening out to find a missed call on the phone. We rang the number and discovered it was from our old house. They had a new number, but the new owner said they'd been out and hadn't rung us. Was it our old house trying to get in touch?
Ooh.
That would really made me think, because I believe strongly that homes have some type of consciousness or some type of collective energy residue from everyone who's lived there.
Oh, 100. I agree with that. Yes, and you can feel it. And I think sometimes there is, especially with old family houses or old family land, they keep an eye on it. So this has nothing to do with what we're talking about, except old houses calling you. Do you keep the numbers of deceased people in your phone?
I guess so. I mean, I still have my mom and dad's numbers.
Okay. Okay. Well, I was going through my phone the other day and then I thought, damn, there's a lot of dead people in here. Well, they might want to ring me up. I better leave them in there.
I will tell you that I found, when I was cleaning out a desk drawer, I found an address book, and it was kind of sad because I was like, oh, they're gone. They're gone. They're gone.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if anyone keeps, like, I don't really keep an address book anymore. It's all in my phone. So that kind of made me a little sad.
I think that a lot of the stuff we're talking about, especially in this next one about love, uh, we have to be open to there being something more.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I agree.
this one is about a romantic coincidence or maybe destiny of soulmates. And the person writes that the boss and her husband have a pretty cool story. They both went to the same college for all 4 years in New England and shared a ton of mutual friends, but they never crossed paths. Aside from one day when he saw her walking across campus and told his friend, I'm going to marry her. almost 10 years later in 2020, when they were both living in completely different states on opposite sides of the country, they both joined a Zoom call for a mutual friend's birthday party. He saw her and was like, oh my God, that's the girl. He asked for her info right away, and they dated long distance for about a year until one weekend she flew up to see him and he proposed on the spot. Oh, and proposed to him on the spot. They've now been married for 2 years, have 3 kids, and just bought a new house.
That's so cool.
It is.
That's so cool. Remember the day I met Michael? He was doing the polar plunge on New Year's Day, and I went to support my sister not to jump in the ocean on January 1st. And I was standing there, like, taking pictures of her coming out of the ocean, and his friend took a picture of him coming out of the ocean, and you can see me in the background.
Oh.
Yeah, and we hadn't met or known. Isn't that wild?
Well, and I think you had shared before that you both had been in New York at the same time in certain places.
Yeah.
I mean, it would have been really easy to have bumped into each other or to have seen each other, or I
Yeah.
love that.
I know. We were in New York at the same time. We were in Arizona at the same time. We have strong connections to Connecticut. It's wild. My cousins live in the town he lived in before he moved to North Carolina.
Oh my goodness.
So every time we go up to New York to see his friends, I get to see my cousins. It's wild. Okay, this one was posted by Shank Mulligan and will make you think about seeing random numbers. He says, I worked at a seafood store in high school about 30 years ago. I once waited on 3 consecutive customers who bought different things that all rang out to the same exact amount, $8.84. I was so amazed that I told the last customer to go 2 shops down to the store that sold lottery tickets and play that number. I actually meant to do that myself, but it was a busy night and I forgot all about it. A couple of weeks later, I was waiting on a customer who bought something small under $10. After giving her change, she handed me $5 and said, this is for you. I looked at her blankly, confused and silent. We occasionally got tips, but not for such a small bill. She said, you might not remember, but the last time you waited on me, you told me to play a lottery number. I did, and it hit. I was happy for her, but distraught. I forgot to play myself. She said her husband was there when she watched the drawing and told him she won. He said, what? You never play the lottery. Her reply was, you're not going to believe it when I tell you. Okay, first of all, I wish she'd given him more than $5.
That's exactly what I was thinking. Okay.
Second of all, I completely understand how he forgot. Years ago, I think my youngest Chloe was like in the 4th grade. And, you have like little assigned desks, and she opens up her desk to get out her little notebook. And there was a piece of paper with 6 numbers written on it. And she had no idea who wrote those numbers or who put it in her desk. And she came home and she said, Mom, I think you should play these numbers. And I was like, okay. Now, Denise, I don't play the lottery. I remember going to like the gas station, and you got to like get a form and you got to fill it. I didn't know how to do it, and I was running late, and I was like, oh, whatever. She still brings that up. She'll be like, if you play those numbers, I bet we would have won the lottery. But I never did. And we don't know where those numbers came from.
Oh, that's funny. And this one is about a meaningful coincidence. The man who wrote The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, L. Frank Baum, didn't live to see his novel turned into the iconic film, yet he had a remarkable connection with the movie. The actor Frank Morgan played 5 roles in the 1939 movie, including the Wizard. He makes his first appearance as Professor Marvel, a traveling fortune teller, and movie lore says that when it came to screen testing, the coat he was wearing was considered too pristine for an itinerant magician. So the wardrobe department was sent to the thrift store mission to find something more suitable, and returned with a whole closet full of possibilities. The one they settled on, a Prince Albert frock coat with a worn velvet collar, was a perfect fit for the actor. Only later was it apparently discovered that sewn into the jacket was a label bearing the inscription made by Herman Brothers, especially for L. Frank Baum. Baum had died 20 years before the film was released, but the coat's provenance was allegedly authenticated by his widow Maud, who accepted it as a gift when the film was completed. So, okay. The woo-woo part of me was like, he still was part of the movie. He was going to
Yes,
say, "Oh, here I am. I am
that's
not
not,
missing this."
totally agree. That's not a coincidence. That's spirit saying, I'm here. I love this movie. I see what's happening. And here's my little wink, wink, nod, nod.
Yeah. And I think a lot of coincidences are a wink, wink, nod, nod.
I do too. I do too.
I
And
don't
I
it's
think our
like,
guides and angels and loved ones have fun with that stuff.
yeah. And it is about paying attention and being more aware.
Yeah, exactly. I had something funny like that over the holidays. I told my dad before he died to show me bluebirds as his
Mhm.
sign. And I hadn't seen a bluebird in a little while over the holidays. And I was like, Dad, I get it. Like, there's not really bluebirds in this cold weather, but I'd like to see a bluebird. And the next day, I'm on Facebook, and how it pops up like, you have a Facebook memory. And it was from a friend of mine. And I don't know, I don't remember her ever doing this. It was from like 2008, but she sent me a picture from her backyard of three bluebirds on her
Oh.
fence. And it said, Samantha, look, three bluebirds on my fence. That's a good sign, right?
Oh.
Yeah. And I thought, oh, thanks, Dad.
Oh, I love that.
Now, this next one is pretty amazing too and was posted on BuzzFeed. The person writes, I was driving from the west side of Manhattan to the east side on 86th Street. My young daughter was in the car, and I had been explaining the concept of 6 degrees of separation. As we approached the 86th and Central Park West, I told her about the Hollywood variation called 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon. Have you ever played that game?
No, but Kevin Bacon is a sign for me when I'm doing readings. You know how they have the big giant pictures of someone's head on a stick?
Yeah.
So I'll see that in my mind's eye, and I know that there's a 6 degrees of separation.
Oh, wow.
Anyway,
All right, so he's explaining to his daughter like how to play the game 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon. We stop at the traffic light, and who crosses the street in front of our car? Yep, Kevin Bacon.
well, that's very fun.
That's pretty cool.
Wow. This was another one on BuzzFeed. This person and her husband went for their first day of work. The new boss was out of town, so it fell to the future husband to give the office tour. He'd never given one before, and he hasn't given one since. After we started talking, we realized that we were supposed to meet several times before my first day. He was supposed to do my interview twice. The first time he was on vacation, and the second time he was on his way to it when he got pulled into an emergency meeting and sent someone else instead. Our relationship would have been a conflict of interest if he had. 8 years later, we discovered that we had, in fact, met each other before my first day 4 months earlier on New Year's Eve at a bar in Phoenix. We chatted at the bar about our same drink orders and his incredibly tall mohawk. Totally wild to meet again in the city so large and full of people. So I think I shared this before that I worked one summer at a camp in upstate New York, and they sent kids from all the boroughs of New York up to, well, it's where Omega is now. It's in that part of New York, upstate New York. And I met this kid, very clean cut. He was in a program at the camp, and I was visiting my friend in the city, and I was in the village, and I came around a corner, and there's this kid that had gone to the camp. I mean, New York's a big city, but remember back in the 80s when people had the really tall mohawks and they wore the leather and the chains and all of that stuff?
Yeah.
So this really clean cut kid was standing, and he, very, very, very sarcastic sense of humor. He was funny as hell. And he said, Denise, what are you doing in the city? And I turned and I looked and I thought, and I used the kid's name, and I thought, what in the hell are the chances of being in the middle of Greenwich Village, walking down in millions of people and seeing this kid that you had met 2 or 3 years before in upstate New York? Because I rarely went to the city.
Wow.
So it's fun.
It is so fun. And that story just makes me think maybe there is a Cupid out there, you know? And poor Cupid is trying to get these two people to meet and is so frustrated. He arranges for them to do the interview so they can meet there. That doesn't work out. He arranges that they had met on New Year's Eve at a bar. Can you imagine like our guides who are trying to get us together and we're so like oblivious?
True.
It's got to be frustrating. Now, this next one is not romantic or fun. It's kind of creepy. And it will make you think about the words that we use that create our reality. Edgar Allan Poe wrote a novel called The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket, in which a ship's crew ends up in a desperate situation with their boat badly damaged. Eventually, the crew had to draw straws to decide who among them will be the next life-sustaining meal. The
Oh,
unlucky character in the story who is stabbed to death and eaten is named Richard Parker. Two of the characters survive to be rescued, thanks in part to that cannibalism. They also eat a tortoise. Now, a few decades later, a real-life yacht named the Mignonette sank in a storm in the Indian Ocean. The four-man crew escaped to a dinghy, but didn't have time to stock many provisions. Like the men in Poe's story, at one point they had to eat a tortoise. And, like the men in Poe's story, they resorted to eating one of their own in a horrifying but potentially necessary case of cannibalism. The unlucky young man's name? Richard Parker.
oh.
What are the odds?
I was watching this really twisted show the other night, and that was what this man was saying. He said, we just keep replaying the same scenarios over and over and over again on this time loop that people think is linear. And it was a real kind of a mind F kind of conversation. So that's what just flashed in my mind about this. What are the chances of that? And was it that same soul light reincarnating into that same situation to try to have it turn out differently?
Yeah, or do our words create our future reality for good and
Oh,
not so good? You know, like I think we did a show on this years ago because there's so many stories about writers. The man who wrote the book about the Titan that
yes.
sank, and Titanic. Charles Dickens was sued because he wrote a ghost story about a woman who died and was haunting a painting, and that actually happened years later. Like there's a lot of stories about writers' stories later coming true.
And
Words
I
are powerful.
they are powerful, and I think all of these examples and the references we made at the beginning, it's up to you whether I'm thinking of my son who really he God love that boy, he has no woo. He does, but he just doesn't like to call it that. He's very practical and grounded. And he'll say, well, I had a weird coincidence happen the other day, or I think this odd coincidence. And in my head, I'm thinking, oh, hell no, that's not a coincidence. That was synchronicity and that was so aligned. So I think part of this is it's fun to look at how we may perceive it.
Mm. And what it says about us and our beliefs.
Right. And not to just drink the Kool-Aid and make everything fit because it doesn't always fit.
No.
But these examples and these stories they're really fun to think about.
Our last one is about coincidences surrounding twins. And I think the research into twins and their mind to mind and energetic connection is absolutely riveting to look into. This one is called The Case of the Two Jims. In 1979, a set of twins was reunited at age 39. They had been separated at 4 weeks old, and for 37 years didn't even know of each other's existence. So when they met, there were a few surprises. Both boys had been named Jim by their adoptive parents. Both loved math and carpentry, and both pursued careers in security. Both were volunteer firefighters. Even eerier, they each married a woman named Linda, divorced the Lindas, and remarried a woman named Betty. As for their kids' names, James Allen and James Allen with one L, it was a fascinating reunion to say the least.
Which ties back to tapping into that collective consciousness. So did they have a chord as twins? Because I mean, I think that would be a chord that would never break if you're sharing the same womb with someone. Holy shit.
I know. My nephews are twins and they call each other womb mates. Isn't that cute?
It's cute.
Well, I hope that this has given everyone something to think about and to really ponder about the ties that link us all together, because we really are in this thing called life together. We're all connected and we can pull on those cords anytime we need some help from other people, a little bit of guidance, or just a little taste of magic to inspire us and be a little bit of wind beneath our wings as we fly through 2025.
Oh, that's a good way to think about it.
Well, that's how it feels to me. All these stories, they just feel magical to me. I don't want to explain them. I don't want science to rationalize them. I just want to marinate in them and think about what a magical, beautiful world we live in.
Yeah, and if you're not feeling like you have a lot of coincidence in your life, you can ask. Say, you know what? Help me see what's around me so that I'll be more aware of it.
Yeah, yeah. Help me see the magic in everyday life. That's a
Perfect.
great request to put out there. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back with you next week. In the meantime, remember to show up, do great work, and share your light.
Take care.